Hi, Dr. Jim Turrell here, and this is Science of Mind 101, the Spiritual Path, Class 1. It's actually the second class because last week we did the Introduction to Science of Mind. So I want to review what this class is about and kind of go over where the goal is. Upon successful completion, the student will have a greater understanding of the nature of life and God's relationship to the individual. You will also understand the creative nature of thought, so important, and begin to use spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer as a means of directing that thought towards a very specific result. Now, last week I showed you this simple example of what we call the subconscious mind. And the jar sort of represents that subconscious mind, and it contains all kinds of things. In this case, it's peanuts. And each of us have a hunger, a desire to know life in a new and different way. And when that hunger interacts with that subconscious supply, well, the idea manifests as food, or as we say, the thought becomes the thing. And that's how we feed ourselves. That's how we get fed. That's how a new way of living becomes predominant, because we have a new thought, we have a different experience. Now, the journey into the self, the purpose of the journey, is one, to discover the truth of your being. And to get to that truth, you will need to examine some untruths that have covered the truth temporarily. And I'm going to talk about what happens when an untruth covers that truth. And you will not like these untruths because they make you won't like what they make you look like, act like, think like, and live like. The journey is heading in one direction, home, back to your spiritual being, the precious cosmic self which dwells within you, waiting to be recognized and appreciated. Although we are all heading in the same direction, our pathways are as unique as we are as individuals. No two people will process the information in these classes in the same fashion, and no two will read the text in the same way. It's really important for you to understand this because that's one of the reasons we talk to each other, to see how we're each viewing it, looking at it, experiencing it. The beauty of the process is that each of us can and will get home if we are open to the process and diligent enough to continue on the path. Now, I said last week that this is a cause and effect teaching, that God is cause. That's a very important concept, and what you experience is the effect. And that all effects are a product of your mentality, energized by your faith, belief, and acceptance. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to present you with another cause and effect example. Your mentality, of course, is activated through prayer. That's why we study prayer. That's why prayer is the primary tool we use. So this is what happens and what tends to block people from experiencing more in their life. You know, there's what we know and what we experience, and in between those two things is the subconscious mind. And also the conscious mind is what we know. And the focus should always be on cause, or God, which is expressing through that subconscious with an infinite supply of new ideas. But what causes us to get hung up is this. It's what we call race mind, or the emotional memory. And it's personal, cultural, social, religious, global, and it's all stacked up and kind of tied together like a big ball of yarn, if you will. And what happens is when we have a new idea and we think to ourselves about something, that emotional memory comes into play and subverts that idea, kind of throws it around, distorts it, and turns it into an experience that we didn't necessarily want. So that emotional memory, that race mind, that collective unconscious, a very important aspect of what we have to heal and what we have to do to get cause to move by means of us into a new idea. Now let's talk a little bit about Dr. Ernest Holmes. The science of mind that Dr. Holmes developed was not a special revelation. It's a synthesis of the greatest spiritual thinkers molded into a scientific approach, providing a foundation for an enduring teaching that leads to a successful and rewarding life. It's also a working cosmology, emphasizing the individual's relationship to God, and you'll see that over and over again, and their place in the universe. And it's a positive, supportive approach to daily living. Ernest Holmes was born on January 21st, 1887 on a small Maine farm. Holmes was the youngest of 9 boys of William and Anna Holmes. He was very inquisitive as a young man and very attached to nature. Now, there's a lot more information about the early life of Holmes in the syllabus, so make sure you read it. In 1914, at the age of 25, Ernest Holmes moved to Venice, California to be near his brother Fenwick, who was a congregational minister. He worked in Parks and Recs, and he discovered the writings of Judge Thomas Troward, and he became a minister of divine science. In 1924, Holmes traveled to New York City to study with Emma Curtis Hopkins, founder of the New Thought movement, and we'll talk a lot more about her as we go. And although his studies lasted for less than a year, Hopkins' impact on the development of his religious work was significant. His mature thought and the mental healing system he developed were based on his study of New Thought authors, especially Thomas Troward, Hudson Larson, and Ralph Waldo Trine. Holmes' greatest work, The Science of Mind, was published in 1926, and the following year he founded the Institute of Religious Science and School of Philosophy. The Science of Mind was expanded into its present form and republished in 1938. His study with Hopkins likely inspired the establishment of the Institute, which would later become the Church of Religious Science. In 1927, Holmes married Hazel Gillen. Holmes' approach and the approach of the movement he founded differed from others in New Thought traditions in at least three ways. Number one, it emphasized a non-sectarian approach or non-Christian character of its teaching. It de-emphasized the theistic elements in its theology, and it accorded great importance to the role of the practitioner. Ernest Holmes passed away in 1960. There's a lot more in the syllabus, so make sure you read it. Now, a real important influence on Ernest Holmes was Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. He was a clockmaker who lived in the northeastern quadrant of the U.S., and he was a student of mesmerism. Now, Antoine Mesmer was a French doctor who developed an early form of hypnotism and discovered, if you will, the subconscious mind. Now, Quimby became fascinated with mesmerism, and he began to experiment by mesmerizing a local fisherman called Lucius Berkmar, who would fall into a trance and oddly enough, diagnose people's illnesses. Quimby saw the mental and placebo effect of the mind over the body when medicines prescribed by Berkmar with no physical value cured patients and diseases. That's called the placebo effect. From the conclusions of these studies, Quimby developed theories of mentally aided healing and opened an office in Portland, Maine in 1859. And among the students and patients who joined his studies and helped him to commit his teaching to writings were Warren Felt Evans, Anita Seabury Dresser, and Julius Dresser. And founders of the New Thought movement as a named movement was Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of the Christian Science movement. Ralph Waldo Emerson was another leading exponent and an influence upon Ernest Holmes, and he was an exponent of the Transcendentalist movement. Ordained as a Unitarian minister in Harvard Divinity School, and he graduated Divinity School when he was 16, he served just 3 years, but he formulated his own spiritual philosophy. He went to Europe and created a completely different way of looking at life, and came back and wrote this essay called Nature, which was widely successful in the U.S. He was best known for leading exponent of Transcendentalist movement, and he championed individualism and intuition and spiritual beliefs. It's impossible to learn about American literature in the 19th century without encountering Ralph Waldo Emerson. His influence was so profound, and his essays were so important, especially his classics like Self-Reliance are still read and discussed more than 160 years after publication. He was associated with people like Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, and John Muir. So what is the science of mind? Well, science of mind represents the correlation of religion, science, and philosophy. We are religion in the sense that we explore and teach universal principles defining the spiritual nature of the universe and our relatedness to God. We're science in that students are asked to experiment with these universal principles and accept only those that they can prove, demonstrate, or experience in their daily life. And we're philosophy in that ideas and ideals are brought together into a system of concepts about God, the cosmos, humanity, and human possibility. Fundamentally, the science of mind is a teaching based on principles. So what is a principle? It's a basic truth or law that has been proved infallible. It works without known exceptions, and it's impersonal. It works for everyone alike. Physical principles or laws are familiar to all of us. We all accept without question the workings of gravity, electricity, mathematics, chemistry, the ways of soil with a seed, and many other companions of our everyday lives. Science of mind deals with spiritual principles that work exactly in the same way, infallibly and impersonally. The primary spiritual principle on which the science of mind is based is simply stated: there is in the universe one reality, principle, and presence, one supreme being, one infinite source of all there is. A commonly used shorthand term for this infinite source is God or Spirit. We say frequently, God is all there is. Each human being is a creation of God, an individualized expression of spirit. I love that word, individualized. Thus we are all one with God and one with each other. There is a divine wholeness, a unity of all life at the source. This leads directly to the realization that God, the source of all, is not out there somewhere, but within you, right where you are. All the other spiritual principles that order the universe, from the furthest galaxy to the smallest cell in our bodies, flow from and are encompassed within the one primary principle summarized above. We live and move and have our being in a universe governed by love and powered by law. This is the science of mind. These principles are what we will be studying. They are what we can learn to apply in any and every facet of our lives, so that daily they reflect more light, more love, more joy, and more fulfillment. So here's this idea of what we know and what we experience. And you can never experience more than you know. And what's in between what you know and your experience is the subconscious mind. Now that's the creative medium. And we also know that in there is the intuition and memory. Now what you know, you think about all day long, and that's called your conscious mind. And it has two aspects. It has choice and initiative. And it's aware of itself and what it thinks. And what it thinks becomes thought. Now that thought, as we have demonstrated before, falls into the subconscious and through that creative medium creates a form which manifests as your experience, engaging all five senses. So there's what you know and what you experience, and there's the subconscious mind or the creative medium, but there has to be something which will animate that internal experience or help that seed grow, and that is, of course, cause. And cause, we say in this teaching, is universal conscious mind or spirit, and it's invisible, and it's also known as God, Goddess, and it works through the subconscious mind. Now, as it energizes our subconscious mind, of course, it creates a visible effect, which then becomes the individualized, externalized form which we experience, and it's also known as the body and the physical senses. Now there's our mentality, and our mentality is basically a product of our conscious mind. And the conscious mind, as we said before, has choice and initiative, and it's aware of itself and what it thinks. And when it becomes aware of what it thinks and what it is, it translates a universal spirit into an internal experience and knowledge. And it always moves from cause to effect. And that thought becomes the seed, which becomes the form. And that's the way it all works, all together. Now the reading assignment for Class 2 is Science of Mind, pages 25 through 39, and How to Speak Religious Science, pages 5 through 9. I look forward to seeing you next week. Make sure you read your syllabus and do your exercise and do your reading. God bless. Have a great week.